My sister-in-law posted on Facebook that I was dangerous around children after I tattooed my niece for her 18th birthday. When I pointed out she was an adult, she snapped, "She's just a girl who can't see the bigger picture, and as her mother, I know what's best for her." I left without a word. That was 9 months ago. Yesterday, she went white in court and collapsed when the judge read the verdict. My sister-in-law sued me for tattooing my niece. I have been a tattoo artist and the black sheep of the family for decades. My brother always looked at my body like the ink made me less than him, and his wife Karen was one of those women who just had to speak her mind. The kind of woman who would tell kids their Mother's Day drawings look terrible, and once even said she'd rather die than have anyone in her family look like me. Well, her daughter, my niece Mindy, came into my shop on her 18th birthday. She wanted a love heart on her tricep with her best friend's death date across it. Simple and meaningful. I got done with the tattoo, took my payment, I tried to give it for free, but she insisted, and let her be on her way. I knew Karen would have something to say, but what I didn't expect was a nuclear call literally 30 minutes later. "You infected her!" Karen screamed so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "She's marked for life because you couldn't say no." I tried explaining that Mindy was 18, that it was legal, that she'd signed all the papers, but Karen told me to watch out, then hung up on me. Then came the family group text. Mom said she was ashamed of me. Eric agreed with her. When I pointed out that Mindy was an adult who wanted the tattoo, Karen butted in and said that she wasn't an adult. She was just a girl who couldn't see the bigger picture, and as her mother, she knows what's best for her. I decided to just leave the group chat. Tomorrow was Sunday, meaning weekly family dinner. I showed up ready to defend myself and Mindy, but Karen blocked the doorway. "Absolutely not," she said. "You're not welcome here until you remove her tattoo." I explained the artist wasn't even the one to do removals, which seemed to make her mad because she screamed that I'd be paying for the removal in that case. I saw Mindy standing in the doorway, her face filled with secondhand embarrassment. "Mom, that tattoo is for Jack. It means a lot. Jack would be ashamed of it." Karen cut her off. Mindy's jaw dropped. I went to say something, but Karen slammed the door in my face. I heard her giving out, but I'm not sure what was said. That night I texted Mindy, but the text bubble went green. Karen had taken Mindy's phone. I knew I needed to help, so I contacted her through her school email and got her to leave early the next day with sickness. I gave her advice on how to deal with her mom, and we decided she needed to move out. She couldn't stay at mine. My lease was ending and I was moving across the country soon, but she could have her own place. I dropped her off a few blocks from her house so Karen wouldn't suspect a thing, but she did. And that night, I got a particularly nasty call where Karen told me if I tried anything else, she'd make me regret it. So naturally, I tried something else. I started sending Mindy money to look for her own place. She was thankful, but that lasted about a week. Karen snooped through her bank account and saw my name. I woke up the next day to her posting on Facebook that I was dangerous around children. Just like that, my reputation was ruined. Now, one of the first things that came up when you Googled my tattoo shop was that post. It destroyed my business overnight. On top of that, she sent the post to our entire extended family without context. I was uninvited from our great-grandmother's 100th birthday party. She even went as far as contacting my shop's licensing company, saying I tattooed minors without parental consent to try get my shop shut down. It was about 2 weeks after the post when Mindy came back into my shop. She was basically in tears. "Uncle, I hate life at home." There were no customers inside, so I knelt down and embraced her. We talked for a bit, and that's when she brought up this one tattoo she's wanted since she was 12. She showed me the design she'd been working on for years, a shark swimming up her forearm. "It's for my love of the ocean, and Jaws is my favorite movie ever, and it's just me. Your mom will actually murder us both," I said, chuckling, knowing what I was about to do. "Mom will disown me either way. I need one person in this family to support me." She paused. "She's been making me wear long sleeves everywhere, made me quit the swim team because someone might see the heart tattoo." "Well, I'm sorry for saying this," I began, "but your mom is one ocean-sized idiot. Let's get this tattoo going." The beam on her face was amazing to see. 3 hours later, she walked out with this gorgeous piece. Mindy tried to hide it at first, only wore hoodies and sweatshirts. She emailed me basically every day laughing about how she was scared, but almost excited to see how much her mom flips out. Well, it didn't take that long. Mindy was changing one of the days when Karen burst into her room with some information she'd found about the dangers of tattoos. And it's while standing there with that graphic in her hand that she saw the shark piece on Mindy's forearm. From what Mindy told me, her reaction was priceless. Rage, sadness, confusion, panic, every negative emotion possible. The only thing she didn't do was drop to her knees and cry. She grabbed Mindy's forearm and actually tried to smack her. Mindy yanked her arm away and dodged, and that's when she decided it would be funny to mess with her mom. "I have a full sleeve booked with Uncle next week," she chuckled. Now Karen actually dropped to her knees. She started crying with rage, and after a minute on the floor, she actually called my brother to cancel their date night. Instead, she got in her car and started speeding to my shop. I was cleaning my equipment when I heard tires screech outside and looked up to see Karen's SUV jump the curb into my parking lot. She slammed the door so hard the whole car rocked and started marching toward my shop with her phone held up recording everything. Her face was red and twisted with rage even from 20 feet away. She started screaming at 2 people walking by to call the police because I was a predator who hurt children. The couple hurried away looking scared while my 2 customers inside looked up from their consultation books. One of them grabbed their stuff and headed for the door immediately. I rushed to lock it just as Karen reached the glass, and her fist started pounding so hard I thought she might break through. She was live streaming on Facebook and screaming that I tattooed her child again. My remaining customer pulled out their phone and started recording her meltdown. I grabbed my phone and held it up to the window, showing Mindy's signed consent forms with the dates clearly visible. Karen tried to grab it through the mail slot and got her hand stuck for a second, which made her even angrier. She started telling everyone passing by that I was grooming her daughter. Someone must have called the cops because a patrol car pulled up 10 minutes later. Officer Rodriguez got out, and Karen immediately ran to him claiming I was a predator who tattooed minors. He asked to see my licenses and consent forms, which I showed him through the window before unlocking the door. Everything was in perfect order, including time-stamped security footage of Mindy arriving alone and excited for her tattoo. While Rodriguez was taking statements, I texted Mindy to warn her about what was happening. She replied that her mom had already torn apart her room looking for evidence, and she was was hiding at her friend Amelia's house. My chest got tight knowing I'd made things worse for her. Rodriguez warned Karen about making false reports and harassment charges if she kept this up. She stormed off, but not before announcing loudly that she was calling her lawyer. Several people had recorded the whole thing on their phones. That evening, I closed the shop early after only 3 customers all day, thanks to Karen's Facebook posts still spreading. Other tattoo artists in town started texting me support, but said they'd never seen anything this crazy. Mom called me that night, and for once she sounded calm instead of angry. She said she'd seen the videos from multiple angles, and Karen looked completely unhinged. It was the first time she hadn't immediately taken Karen's side, but she still told me I needed to stop tattooing Mindy because things were getting out of control. The next morning, a process server showed up at my shop with a thick envelope. Karen was suing me for intentional infliction of emotional distress and seeking $50,000 in damages plus a restraining order. My hands shook as I read through the legal papers. That afternoon, my phone rang, and it was my lawyer saying the restraining order hearing was tomorrow, and if it got granted, I couldn't be within 500 feet of Mindy. My stomach dropped hard. I told him she was 18, but he said the judge might grant it temporarily until the full hearing happened. Right after that call, Derek texted me security footage from the day Karen showed up at my shop. The video showed her keying my car before she even came inside. He wrote that I might want this for tomorrow. I spent the whole night getting ready for court and organizing every consent form and text message and character reference I had. Each piece of paper felt like a small shield against Karen's money and connections. The next morning at the courthouse, Karen showed up with 3 lawyers while I only had 1. She wore this conservative suit and played the concerned mother perfectly. They said Mindy was too traumatized to be in the courtroom, which was total BS. The judge looked at Karen's evidence first, and she'd actually hired some cult expert who testified that tattoo artists often mark vulnerable youth for trafficking. My lawyer objected hard, but the damage was already done, and several people in the gallery gasped. When we showed the security footage of Karen keying my car, she claimed it was deep-faked and demanded forensic analysis. The judge granted a 2-week continuance with the temporary restraining order in effect, which meant I couldn't contact Mindy at all. I wonder what's really driving Karen to go this far, calling lawyers and making up stories about trafficking. There's something deeper here than just not liking tattoos. The way she blocked Mindy from the family dinner and took her phone makes me curious about what kind of control she needs to have over her daughter's life right now. Outside the courthouse, Eric caught me in the parking lot and told me this was insane. He said Karen hired a private investigator to follow me, and I needed to document everything because she was looking for any violation. His hands shook as he lit a cigarette, even though he quit years ago. I went back to an empty shop with 3 more 1-star reviews online, all claiming I tattoo minors. My afternoon appointments had all canceled. Derek brought me coffee and offered to write a statement about Karen's harassment. 3 days later, Mom called me whispering. She said Karen came by asking if she'd seen Mindy, and Mom said no, but Karen seemed suspicious. Karen mentioned putting up a $5,000 reward for information about Mindy's whereabouts. Then a news van appeared outside my shop because Karen gave an interview to local news about predatory tattoo artists targeting children. They wanted my comment, but my lawyer told me to stay silent, even though silence looked like guilt. That night, I was closing up the shop when I heard glass exploding, and a brick landed on my floor with a note taped to it that said, "Child Predator" in red paint. I ran outside, but whoever did it was already gone, and when I checked my security cameras, they'd been spray-painted black first. Derek came over within 20 minutes and helped me sweep up the glass and board up the window with plywood from his truck. My hands were shaking the whole time we worked, and Derek kept saying we needed to call the cops, but I knew it wouldn't help since there was no evidence of who did it. Around midnight, I got an email from Mindy using Mom's computer saying she was going to the courthouse tomorrow to file for a restraining order against Karen. She said Mom had been recording Karen's calls where she made threats and admitted to stuff, and Mindy was done hiding. The next morning, I drove to the courthouse and waited outside in my car since I couldn't go in with her because of the restraining order distance rules. Mindy went inside with a folder full of papers, and about 10 minutes later, Karen showed up with 2 lawyers in suits. I watched through the glass doors as Karen started screaming that Mindy had been brainwashed, and when she actually lunged at her daughter, the security guards had to grab her and pull her back. The clerk at the filing desk saw the whole thing happen and started processing Mindy's paperwork faster, while Karen's lawyers tried to say Mindy didn't have the mental capacity to file legal documents. The clerk just looked at them and said she's 18, so please step back. Karen was still yelling as the guards made her move away from the counter, and Mindy finished filling out her forms. That afternoon, Eric texted me saying Karen didn't know he was helping Mindy get her important documents like her birth certificate and social security card from a safety deposit box, and he was meeting her tomorrow. 2 days later, I was in my apartment making coffee when my neighbor started banging on my door saying some creepy guy was taking pictures through my window. The cops showed up and caught the guy who turned out to be a private investigator Karen hired, and he told them he was documenting my lifestyle for court, but they arrested him for trespassing anyway. My lawyer came to my shop the next day and brought copies of Derek's security footage from the removal place and the police report about the PI getting arrested. He said this was good because it showed a pattern of harassment, and the judge would see it at the full hearing next week, which was the first real hope I'd felt in weeks. That night, I had this dream about just doing normal tattoos on regular customers who wanted art on their skin, and woke up to find 2 more shops in town had told their artists not to associate with me because they were scared of the bad publicity. 12 years of building my reputation was just crumbling away piece by piece. Then Mom called me panicked because Karen was at her house with 2 police officers demanding to search for Mindy, and I could hear Karen screaming about kidnapping in the background, while an officer was saying they needed a warrant to search anything. About 30 minutes later, Officer Rodriguez showed up at Mom's house, and I heard him on the phone telling Karen that filing false reports was a crime, and her daughter was a legal adult. Karen kept insisting Mindy was mentally incompetent, but when Rodriguez asked for documentation, she couldn't provide anything, and just kept repeating that a mother knows what's best for her child. The front door opened, and Mindy walked out holding her phone up like she was recording everything. She looked right at Rodriguez and said she wanted to file harassment charges against her mom. She showed him her phone screen with hundreds of texts from Karen calling her stupid and worthless and threatening to send her to a mental hospital. Rodriguez took the phone and started scrolling through the messages while his face got more and more serious. Karen tried to grab the phone, but Rodriguez stepped back and told her that threatening text to her daughter could be criminal harassment. Karen's face went white, then red. Then she started screaming that Mindy was lying and those texts were taken out of context. Eric's car pulled up right then, and he got out looking confused at all the police cars. Karen ran over to him yelling about how I'd turned Mindy against her, but Eric just walked past her toward us. He asked what was happening, and when Rodriguez explained about the harassment charges, Eric's shoulders dropped like he'd been expecting this. Karen grabbed Eric's arm, screaming that he needed to support her, but he pulled away and stepped between her and Mindy. He told Karen she was destroying their family, and this had to stop. I'd never seen Eric stand up to her like that in 20 years of marriage. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish, while she stared at Eric like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. She started crying and saying he was choosing Mindy over his own wife, but Eric just shook his head. Rodriguez warned Karen to watch her language when she started calling Mindy names I won't repeat here. Karen screamed something about getting the best divorce lawyer in Portland and stormed off toward her car. Eric actually looked relieved as she drove away with her tires squealing. That evening, we all sat in Mom's kitchen for the first time without Karen in years. Eric kept apologizing and saying he should have stopped her sooner, but the control just got worse every year. Mindy pulled out her laptop and showed us emails from her high school, where Karen had been calling them trying to get Mindy's records changed. She told them Mindy was mentally delayed and needed special supervision, but the principal refused and reported Karen for harassment. The school counselor had even offered to help Mindy file for a restraining order if she needed one. The next morning, my landlord called me at the shop saying Karen had offered him double my rent if he'd evict me. He told her to get lost, but warned me she was also calling my ink suppliers trying to cut off my inventory. 2 of my suppliers had already gotten calls from her claiming I was selling drugs out of my shop. Derek heard about everything and started organizing the other tattoo artists in Portland for a support campaign. Within 2 days, they had photos of my work all over social media with testimonials from happy clients. The hashtag #StandWithInkArtists started trending locally, and people were sharing stories about their own controlling family members. That's when I got an email from a former client who was a lawyer specializing in defamation cases. She said Karen's Facebook posts were definitely actionable and offered to take my case pro bono because she hated bullies. 3 months later, we were finally in court for the full hearing on Karen's restraining order request against me. The courtroom was packed with people Karen had brought from her church group as character witnesses, even though none of them had ever met me. Mindy sat in the gallery looking uncomfortable while Karen kept turning around to glare at her. My lawyer stood up and presented our timeline showing Mindy had turned 18 3 weeks before getting her first tattoo. She showed all the consent forms Mindy had signed and the ID verification we'd done. Karen's lawyer tried arguing about undue influence and said I'd exploited Mindy's grief over Jack's death to manipulate her into getting tattooed. The judge turned his attention to Mindy and asked if anyone had forced her to get the tattoos. She stood up straight in the witness box, and her voice came out clear and strong when she said no one forced her and that they meant something to her, and her mother was trying to control her life and choices. Karen shot up from her seat so fast her chair scraped against the floor and started yelling that Mindy didn't know what she wanted and to look at her because she was marked for life. The judge's gavel came down hard, and he warned Karen about outbursts while her lawyers grabbed her arms trying to pull her back down into her seat, but she shook them off and kept glaring at Mindy. The judge spent the next 20 minutes going through all the evidence my lawyer had submitted, including the false police reports Karen had filed saying I was dealing drugs out of my shop, the Facebook posts that destroyed my business, receipts showing she'd hired a private investigator to follow me, and recordings my landlord had made of her trying to bribe him to evict me. His face got more and more serious as he flipped through each document, while Karen sat there looking smug like she thought all this evidence was actually helping her case somehow. The judge set down the papers and looked directly at Karen before stating he was dismissing all charges against me and granting Mindy's request for a restraining order against Karen and referring the case for criminal harassment charges. The judge dropped that hammer harder than Karen's jaw when Eric finally picked a side. Watching someone's power trip crash into legal reality is like watching a car try to argue with a brick wall. Karen's face went white, and she actually fainted right there in the courtroom, hitting the floor with a thud, while everyone scrambled around her and the bailiff called for medical help. A week later, I got a call from my lawyer telling me Karen had been formally charged with harassment, filing false police reports, and attempted extortion since my landlord had recorded her trying to bribe him. She was out on bail, but legally couldn't contact me, Mindy, or even Mom, which must have been killing her since she loved controlling everyone. Business started coming back to my shop slowly, with some clients specifically booking appointments because they'd heard about the case and wanted to support someone standing up to controlling parents. Derek came by with some new aftercare products he'd developed, and we started working together on a line specifically for sensitive skin, which was actually doing pretty well. Eric showed up at my shop one afternoon looking exhausted and told me he'd filed for divorce and emergency custody of their younger son, Sam, who was 16, and he couldn't let Karen do to him what she'd done to Mindy. We talked for hours that day and started building the kind of relationship we'd never had growing up when he always looked down on me for my tattoos. 2 weeks after that, Mindy called me panicked because some women from Karen's church had shown up at her new apartment claiming they just wanted to check on her but asking all these questions about her living situation and whether she was going to church. Mindy was smart though and recorded everything on her phone documenting each time they came by, which added more violations to Karen's growing list of charges. My lawyer Janet filed our defamation suit seeking $200,000 in damages for the lost business from Karen's Facebook posts, and the court immediately froze Karen's assets pending the investigation, which meant she couldn't afford her fancy lawyers anymore and had to use a public defender for the criminal charges. Mom called me crying one night, asking if I'd come to dinner that Sunday, and when I showed up, it was just me, Eric, Mindy, and Sam sitting around the table like a real family for once. Mom looked at me with tears in her eyes and said she was wrong about everything, and that she'd let Karen's voice become louder than her own judgment, and my tattoos didn't make me less than anyone. A month passed, passed and things seemed almost normal until the prosecutor called to say Karen's criminal trial was coming up and she'd been calling every relative she could find trying to get them on her side. Most of the family had seen the evidence by now and knew the truth, but a few cousins believed her wild stories about me being some kind of predator who'd brainwashed Mindy. The prosecutor met with us the week before trial and told us Karen's public defender was pushing for a plea deal with just probation and counseling, but the state wanted jail time because of how many times she'd harassed us and filed false reports. Karen refused any deal that meant admitting she'd done anything wrong. That same week, Mindy got her acceptance letter to art school with a partial scholarship, and she'd written her whole admissions essay about her tattoos and what they meant to her. She showed it to me, and there was this line that said her mom always told her art was worthless, but now it was going to be her future. I'd been planning to move across the country when my lease ended, but my landlord actually offered me a cheaper rent if I'd stay, because he felt bad about all the damage Karen had done to my business. The shop that almost died was actually doing better than ever, now that people knew the real story. The trial started on a Tuesday morning, and Karen took the stand first, claiming she was just protecting her mentally fragile daughter from making bad choices. The prosecutor showed her Mindy's honor roll grades and the art school acceptance letter, and Karen actually said they were fake documents we'd made up. The next day, Officer Rodriguez testified about all the false reports she'd filed and how she'd tried to bribe him to arrest me. They played the security footage from my shop's camera, showing her keying my car in broad daylight while her church friends sat in the gallery looking like they'd seen a ghost. This wasn't the woman who ran their bake sales and organized prayer groups. Then the prosecutor played the recorded phone calls, where Karen offered the tattoo removal guy $5,000 to say I'd threatened him, and another call where she told someone she'd destroy my business and anyone who helped me. Her voice filled the courtroom clear as day, saying those exact words. Eric took the stand on day 3 and talked about years of her controlling everything from what the kids wore to who they could be friends with and how she'd cut him off from his own family. He looked right at the jury and said he'd enabled it by staying silent, and he'd failed his children by not standing up to her sooner. Sam reached over from where he sat behind us and squeezed his dad's shoulder. The jury went to deliberate after closing arguments, and we sat in the hallway waiting while Mindy sketched in her notebook. She showed me her newest design, which was a phoenix rising from ashes with flames that turned into flowers at the tips. She said it was for after all this was over and she could finally start fresh. 3 hours later, they called us back in, and the foreman stood up and said guilty on all counts. Karen jumped up screaming that we'd all been brainwashed and this was some big conspiracy against her, and the judge had to bang his gavel 3 times to get order back. He sentenced her to 18 months in prison plus 3 years probation and mandatory counseling after she got out. The courtroom cleared out, and Eric grabbed my shoulder outside and just stood there for a second before pulling me into the first hug we'd had in years. A week later, I was setting up the shop when 3 people from Karen's church walked in looking nervous and asked if they could talk to me for a minute. They told me how Karen had been telling them all these stories about me for years and how they'd believed her, but after seeing the court case and the evidence, they realized she'd been lying the whole time. One woman actually started crying and said she was sorry for believing I was dangerous, and another guy shook my hand and said the church board had voted to remove Karen from all her positions even before the verdict came in. That same afternoon, Eric brought Sam by the shop after school, and Sam was looking at all the designs on the walls with his eyes wide. He asked me if I'd give him a tattoo when he turned 18 in 2 years, something small to remember that standing up to bullies matters even when they're family. Eric actually nodded and said he thought it was a good idea, which shocked me more than anything else that had happened. 3 days later, my lawyer called to tell me the defamation settlement had been approved for $150,000, which would come from Karen's assets since she'd been found guilty. I decided to use part of it to set up a fund for young adults trying to escape controlling families, and Mindy helped me design the logo, which was a broken chain turning into birds flying away. 2 months passed, and Karen's lawyer filed an appeal, claiming she'd been suffering from emotional distress. But the appeals court took one look at the pattern of behavior, the fake CPS reports, the calculated defamation campaign, and denied it in less than an hour. Meanwhile, Karen had started sending letters from prison to distant relatives, claiming she was a political prisoner being persecuted for her religious beliefs and traditional values. My cousin in Texas called me confused, and I just emailed him the court transcripts and police reports, and he called back an hour later apologizing for even questioning what happened. Eric told me he'd started taking the kids to therapy, and the therapist had them all reading about controlling behavior and manipulation tactics. He said they were learning what normal looked like, and it turned out tracking your kids' every move and going through their phones daily wasn't love, but control. The shop started getting more popular after the news coverage shifted to show the real story, and I decided to host a Freedom Art Day where anyone over 18 whose parents disapproved could get discounted tattoos. The line wrapped around the block, and the local news covered it as a positive story about personal expression and family acceptance. Mom surprised everyone by showing up that day and asking for her first tattoo at 67 years old, a small heart on her wrist with all her grandchildren's initials inside it. She laughed while I was doing it and said if Karen could see this, she'd probably have a stroke, but that maybe it was time the family stopped living in fear of one person's opinions. 6 months into Karen's sentence, Mindy had her first art show at the student gallery, and the centerpiece was this huge painting of her tattoos with the title, "My Body, My Canvas, My Choice." It sold for $500 to a woman who said she'd escaped her own controlling mother, and the piece spoke to her. Karen got released after 8 months for good behavior, but she couldn't help herself and drove past my shop 4 times in her first week out, which violated the restraining order that was part of her parole. The security cameras I'd installed caught everything, including her taking photos of the shop and making hand gestures at the windows. The parole officer didn't even hold a hearing, just sent her straight back to serve the full 18 months plus 6 more for the violation. The district attorney's office called me 3 months later, asking if they could use our case for their training program. They wanted to show new prosecutors how harassment cases can escalate when controlling behavior goes unchecked. I signed the papers, and they sent me a copy of the training video where they blurred our faces but kept all the details. Really makes me wonder what Karen's thinking, sending letters from prison claiming claiming she's some kind of political prisoner when there's literally video of her keying cars and recordings of her trying to bribe people. Does she actually believe her own story at this point? Eric started seeing a therapist he met at one of his counseling sessions, and they hit it off right away. She understood boundaries and actually encouraged him to set them with family members. Sam thought it was weird having someone who wasn't trying to control every part of his life. Meanwhile, Mindy came into my shop with a new design she'd been working on. She wanted a phoenix on her shoulder blade to represent rising from all the crap her mom put her through. As I worked the needle across her skin, she talked about Jack and how he would have loved seeing her free like this. The shop felt quiet and peaceful that afternoon. Almost a year to the day after her first tattoo, Mindy organized a memorial fundraiser at my shop for Jack. We did tattoos all day with the money going to mental health support for teens who'd lost friends. Over 200 people showed up, and we raised almost $15,000. That same week, I got a call from Eric's lawyer saying Karen had sent a letter from prison trying to claim grandparents' rights to see Sam. The lawyer laughed and said he wouldn't even file it since convicted harassers don't get custody rights. Derek came by the shop later that month with a business proposal. He wanted to open a second location together and said our story had inspired him to stand up to bullies in his own life. We shook hands and started looking at spaces downtown. Mindy entered an art competition with a piece about bodily autonomy, using photos of her tattoos as the centerpiece. She won first place and got a gallery showing in New York as part of the prize. She didn't mention her mom once in the acceptance speech. As Karen's final release date got closer, Eric went to court to get a permanent restraining order for the whole family. The judge granted it immediately based on her criminal record, and she'd have to stay 1,000 feet away from all of us forever. She'd be coming back to an empty house since Eric had already filed for divorce and moved out with Sam. They released her to a halfway house across town, and within 3 hours she was on social media posting about being a victim of the system. Nobody cared anymore though, since all her old friends had moved on after seeing the truth. The family gathered at Portland State for Mindy's college graduation, where she gave the valedictorian speech. She had 7 tattoos now, each one with its own meaning and story. Her speech talked about choosing your own path and not letting anyone else define who you're supposed to be. Karen wasn't there, of course, but nobody missed her. 2 years passed before Eric finally got around to proposing to his new girlfriend Lily, and when their wedding day came that next summer, Sam stood there as his best man, looking so grown up in his suit. Mindy got up to do a reading she'd written herself about how real love means accepting people exactly as they are, not trying to change them into what you think they should be, and I watched Mom wipe tears from her eyes the whole time. The ceremony was small, just 30 people in Mom's backyard, but it felt more like family than any of those huge dinners we used to have with Karen running the show. After everything settled down, I started teaching workshops at the local tattoo convention about dealing with difficult parents and making sure you have all your paperwork perfect, because you never know when someone's going to try to sue you. Young artists would come up to me afterwards saying they'd heard about my case and asking for advice about similar situations, and I'd show them my filing system and explain how important it is to stand your ground when you know you're right. The story got picked up by some advocacy groups, and before I knew it, the city council was actually considering legislation they started calling Mindy's Law, which would make it a specific crime to harass or threaten business owners who provide legal services to adult children. The councilwoman who sponsored it said Karen had actually done us all a favor by being so extreme that nobody could argue against protecting service providers from crazy parents. It passed unanimously 6 months later, and they invited Mindy and me to the signing ceremony, where the mayor said this would protect countless young adults from having their autonomy violated by controlling parents. About 2 years after that first tattoo, Mindy called me with huge news that she'd saved enough to open her own art studio right next door to my shop. The first piece she hung up was this beautiful portrait of Jack surrounded by hearts and sharks, and she said it was perfect because he would have loved seeing her follow her dreams without letting anyone stop her. The grand opening brought in half the neighborhood, and even Eric showed up with his family to support her, taking pictures of everything and posting them online with captions about how proud he was of his niece. Sam turned 18 the following spring, and guess who walked into my shop on his birthday asking for his first tattoo? He wanted a small compass on his wrist, and when I asked him why, he said it was so he'd never lose his way like his mom did. Eric stood there taking photos the whole time, telling Sam how good it looked and how he was proud of him for making his own choices. We got word through the lawyers around that time that Karen had moved to Arizona and was still posting on various forums about her stolen family, but the permanent restraining orders meant she couldn't contact any of us ever again. Her posts got less and less engagement as people realized she was just bitter about losing control, and eventually she faded into irrelevance, just another angry person shouting into the void of the internet. Mom decided to host Thanksgiving that year, and the table was packed with Eric's new family, Mindy's girlfriend Amy, Sam's college friends, and even Derek came with his partner. Mom stood up before dinner and said this was what family really looked like, people who choose to love each other exactly as they are, instead of demanding they become something else. The next week, this young woman came into my shop, nervous and fidgeting with her phone, and told me her parents hated tattoos, but she was 18 and wanted to honor her late grandmother. I showed her all the consent forms, explained her rights as an adult, and told her that her body was her choice, nobody else's, and she smiled with such relief before picking out a beautiful design. These days, Mindy and I work side by side with customers flowing between our shops, checking out her paintings, and then coming to me for custom tattoo designs based on her art. The walls have all these newspaper clippings about our case and Mindy's Law, but honestly, we hardly talk about it anymore because we're too busy living our actual lives. We survived Karen's war against our family, and now we spend our days creating art and helping other young people claim their independence from controlling parents. Every tattoo I ink feels like a small revolution, a permanent mark of someone choosing their own path, and Mindy says her paintings are the same way, expressions of freedom that nobody can take away. The shop that almost died because of one Facebook post is now a symbol of resistance in our community, and parents know better than to try to bully us into refusing service to legal adults. Sometimes I think about those family dinners where Karen would criticize everyone and control every conversation, and I'm grateful she showed her true colors because it freed all of us to build something real. Mindy keeps that first tattoo, the heart for Jack, touched up and bold old, and she told me recently that it reminds her every day that love means supporting people's choices, not controlling them. Sam's at art school now, studying design, and he sends me pictures of his projects with notes about how he's incorporating tattoo aesthetics into his work. Eric and Lily had a baby girl last year, and Eric already jokes that when she's 18, she can make her own choices about everything, including tattoos. Mom turned our old family group chat into something new without Karen, where we actually support each other instead of tearing each other down. The last time I saw Karen was in a lawyer's office 3 years ago for the final settlement, and she looked smaller somehow, like all that anger had eaten her from the inside out. But we don't dwell on her anymore because we're too busy with our actual family, the one we chose to build after she tried to destroy it. Time flies when you're not being sued by your crazy relatives, doesn't it? Thanks for letting me snark through this wild ride with you. Like the video, it helps more than you think.